Welcome back to Small Caps, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kerry Stevenson, and I'm talking with Dr. Tom Duthy. He's Executive Director for Neurotech International. I always kind of get the neuro and the tech, but it's Neurotech International. The ASX code is NTI. Now, what do they do? It's fascinating stuff. Paediatric neurological disorders. And I didn't realize just how big a market this is, and it's actually pretty close to home. It's quite personal for me because one of the areas that they're focusing in on is cerebral palsy. And without being too out there, my niece has cerebral palsy. So this is going to be a very interesting discussion. Tom, thanks for joining me on Small Caps today. Great to see you.
Thank you, Kerry. Nice to be here. How are you?
Well, first of all, thank you on behalf of our family for the work that you are doing in cerebral palsy, because there are different levels, but I know, for example, my niece is quite severely affected with cerebral palsy. So thank you. But let's get on with it. First time you and I have spoken, can you just give us a brief overview of who are Neurotech?
Sure, thanks. So Neurotech is developing what we define as a broad spectrum cannabinoid drug platform, principally to treat paediatric neurological disorders. And at least in some instances, they tend to be rare in their nature. And so our drug product, we've learned a lot about it through our preclinical work, and we know that it is highly effective at dampening down what's called neuroinflammation, so inflammatory processes in the brain. And that is actually quite a progressive and difficult situation for these particular children in a range of neurological disorders. And so the four we're really focused in on is autism spectrum disorder, ASD, Rett syndrome, which is a rare disorder that affects predominantly girls. It's fatal for boys. We also have, as you mentioned, cerebral palsy under our development remit. And finally, we have a neurological disorder, which most people, in fact, I'm guessing all people would not have heard of before, called PANDAS-PANS, which is an acute neuropsychiatric syndrome that can be associated with a streptococcus infection in some cases.
Oh, wow.
So these are disorders that are invariably hard to treat, or where there are treatments, they're not very effective. So autism is a classic case where there are treatments used. Risperidone is one. Those treatments tend to be restrictive for the child. They tend to just suppress or dampen down particular facets of their disorder, notably irritation and aggression. Whereas NTI-164, the evidence we've now generated both preclinically, but also over 52 weeks of oral daily treatment with our drug NTI-164, was able to profoundly improve autistic patients, and there were 11 that have completed 52 weeks, profoundly impact in a positive way the severity of their treatment and severity of their disorder, I should say. And more particularly, it actually it enabled a lot of their positive behaviours, socialization, communication, how they integrated with their peers. And for the parents, not only was that a profound difference, it also meant that their children were able to go back to school. And so we had a lot of support and a lot of positive feedback on our trial, and those children continue to receive treatment today.
And is this one drug, you mentioned NTI-164, is that the same drug for all of these different disorders, or are there different drugs for different?
It certainly is the one formulation that we've been at pains to develop as a drug product for really any disorder where there's neuroinflammatory processes. But we do focus in on those paediatric or child populations, principally because as a small biotechnology company, those paediatric indications particularly tend to be unencumbered. So you're not competing with other large pharmaceutical companies to run a trial in children. Typically, the paediatric population is underrepresented through new therapeutic agents. And so as a small company with limited financial resources and a very committed clinician group in Australia, it made complete and utter sense for us to really focus in on our strengths, to just look at paediatric populations for NTI-164. Having said that, from a hypothetical perspective, it's not a core strategy, but there's no rhyme or reason why NTI-164 could not be at least as effective in an adult population. It's just that we are really exquisitely focused on pediatric patients for now.
Yeah, for now, because I was going to ask you, could this be applied across the board for neurological disorders? Because I guess the brain and inflammation are where the problems lie. And so what you're saying is your drug treats the inflammation and as a result has good outcomes. Is that in simplicity?
That's correct. So it has that really nice, and I think it's very difficult to argue against its proven ability in a human population, notably our autistic children who have completed those 52 weeks of treatment. So it has, very strong effects on neuroinflammatory responses in the brain, but also our preclinical work has shown that it has something called neuroprotective ability. So it not only dampens prolonged inflammation, it also protects neuronal cells, i.e. the brain cells, from either suicide or permanent damage relating to the disorder. So it's got a number of attractive qualities about it. And the one thing I would say about NTI-164 is that the safety and toxicity data that we've generated over 52 weeks of daily treatment, it is very, very safe. So the only adverse events recorded in children, so it's formulated in an oil. The only side effects was a little bit of an upset stomach in some cases, and that may in fact relate to the oil itself, but it's a very benign intervention that has a very strong clinical effect. And that, for us, is a perfect formulation for a pediatric population particularly.
And I'm asking this from a personal point of view. What sort of age group are you looking at the moment? And would you consider older patients, or is it quite a small bandwidth?
So for our autistic study, so that was a phase 1/2 trial. It was 8 to 17-year-olds. Mm-hmm. We have plans to commence a Rett syndrome study when we receive Human Ethics Committee clearance hopefully the next few weeks. They could be as low as 3 years to 17 years. Similarly for cerebral palsy. So initially, at least, we are going to stick to our knitting, as it were, and focus in on those pediatric patients, so sub 18 years of age. Mm-hmm. But like you say, Kerry, I guess ultimately it is adaptable and applicable for an adult population. But our balance sheet for now supports these time and cost-effective pediatric studies that offer a very significant return on the incremental dollar invested, because they are unencumbered. No drug treatments in some of our indications, 1 or 2 at most in others, and they can have significant side effects. So I think there's a great opportunity.
Biotechs, they've been a bit on the nose, just a little bit. Your share price is, it's just been sort of sitting around the 5-cent mark for the moment. Talk to us about some milestones in 2023 that you see for those current shareholders and also our audience out there, what they can expect to see for 2023.
Sure. I would say that, it's difficult for a lot of biotech companies to have that persistent news flow that is of a meaningful nature to a retail or institutional investor. And so, unfortunately, in a bear market, which we're in now for biotech, those without what I would deem a sort of high quality news flow kind of just sit and wither on the vine. Whether they're fully funded or not is also an important consideration. And I'll just add, Kerry, that we are fully funded to complete all of these 4 trials or 4 indications that we're currently running. That's important. So we raised money. We raised $9 million in Q4 of last year. And so for us, the news flow, I think, is exceptional. So we have commenced a phase 2 study in that rare neurological disorder called PANDAS-PANS. We expect to report that study outcome most likely early in the second half of this calendar year. We will commence a Rett syndrome study in 15 girls, hopefully early in the second half of this calendar year. We have a phase 2/3 trial in 54 autistic children, which is a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial of NTI-164. We expect to fully recruit that trial again during this calendar year. There is potential, depending on the recruitment profile, that we may well have data in that trial in the second half of this calendar year. So there's and finally for cerebral palsy, which you're passionate about, obviously from your niece's perspective, we expect to file for ethics approval this half, and we are somewhat hopeful we can commence that trial in the second half of this calendar year. So of our $8 million as at 31 December, all these trials are budgeted for and funded from that balance sheet as it currently stands. So we're not here today begging mercilessly for some money. We're not. We're fully funded. Nice position to be in.
Really nice position to be in. And I think we spoke briefly before about capital preservation is one of the key things that you are passionate about as well. Is this is shareholder funds. You're going to make sure that it's spent the right way so that you can get down the track and reach those milestones.
Absolutely. And if you look at the corporate structure of Neurotech, it's very intentional. So we don't have a high fixed cost base. It's a sub $1 million annual corporate expense to be a public listed company. Everything else goes to the R&D. And we do that by way of almost a virtual operating model where we contract and consult with experts who are far smarter than myself in the way they design these trials and the way we execute these trials. But I would say the reason these are so cost and time effective is because we have the absolute advocate champions in two professors of neurology, both in Sydney and Melbourne, who have a range of different kids on their register, who have a range of different neurological disorders. So we are very simply using the conferred knowledge and benefit that they now have from NTR 164 and autism, and very simply applying that to their next set of disorders that they have children available and willing to enter into a clinical trial. So that's a little unusual in the context of Australian biotech that when you run trials that you have such committed clinicians. So we certainly thank them for their interest, and we admire what they do for our company and how they are real champions for their patients as well.
Well, and I guess ultimately the outcome of our next generation and giving them a better quality of life. Tom,
spot on.
I know that Neuron Pharmaceuticals recently they received approval. Aren't they doing something similar to what you do? And they're quite a big company. I think your market. Sorry to do this to you, but I think your market cap's about 50 mil and their market cap's about 2 bill. But yep. Aren't you doing something quite similar, or have I got that wrong?
Spot on, Kerry. Yeah. So Neuron Pharmaceuticals. So we're Neurotech. They sound similar. I assure you, we didn't change our name because they're 2 billion and we're 50. But Neuron Pharmaceuticals is a company I've admired and followed for near on 20 years in the financial markets. And you're absolutely right. Neuron Pharmaceuticals since 2016 has pivoted their entire clinical pipeline to rare pediatric neurological disorders. And they found a very strong and adaptable partner in the United States. And 2 weeks ago, that partner applied for and received approval for Rett syndrome, which is one of the disorders where, as I mentioned, we're about to start a phase 2 clinical trial on, subject to an ethics approval. And that opportunity for Neuron has delivered something like $800 million in incremental market capitalization from the day it was approved. Now, that is the very straightforward and very simple business model that Neurotech is following, albeit we have commonality in Rett syndrome. We have those 3 other disorders that are outside the remit of Neuron. But this is why you look at pediatric populations. Rett syndrome has, I think, around 5,000 children who are registered in the United States, and Neuron's partner, Arcadia, are seeking to charge on or around the sort of $400,000 per annum for these children. And that is a function of the critical market need and the extreme market pull, both from a regulatory perspective and a patient doctor perspective, to find a treatment that can improve the quality of life for these children which are seriously ill. So kudos to Neuron, and we're a fast follower. Probably not in the absolute literal sense. We're not filing for approval ourselves, but again, Rett syndrome has very well established clinical evidence that supports progressive, persistent neuroinflammation. And on first principles, as I mentioned at the outset of the call, that's exactly what NTI-164 is really good at dampening down. So we're very excited by our Rett syndrome trial, and that is a trial wholeheartedly where the clinicians want to do it.
So your NTI 164 have you got patents around it? Have you got exclusivity? In other words, what I guess I'm coming up to here is, do you butt heads with Neuron, or do you swim along the same pathway?
No, it's a very different formulation drug product in our case to theirs. And in fact, there's, ultimately there could actually be some synergies between the two, but no, our proposed mechanism of action and our drug effect is substantially different. There are some similarities, which I won't bore your audience with, but our position and our patent have been filed. They're in the process of what's called the PCT process. But we also rely on, aside from our patents, we also plan to lever up the company's monopolistic rights through regulatory conferred designations. And the obvious one to mention here is something called an orphan drug designation, which gives you 10 years market exclusivity in Europe and 7 years in the United States. And that follows the drug product or the actual what's in your offering to the patients. It doesn't follow the indication. So it's not like Neuron, who have an orphan designation in Rett. It only means that someone trying to copy Neuron's drug product is incumbent in doing so through that orphan designation. So we like the synergies. We like the opportunity in Rett. Absolute kudos to Neuron, as I mentioned, because what it has set now for us is a very clearly defined hurdle in terms of what efficacy we need to show, and certainly what safety we need to deliver for our patients.
Kind of reminds me of remember it back in the day with the tapes. What was it? VHS and Beta, was it?
Yeah, only won, by the way. I think we can both win, but yes.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying. Sometimes going along secondly is not a bad thing. Just quietly,
you learn a lot from being the second into a market as opposed to the first. The first always cuts a path. And look, we actually hope in every respect to emulate what Neuron has done for its shareholders in Rett. Yes, we have a program in Rett, and they will absolutely be the first to market across, if not all territories globally, certainly most. But we sort of see much the same situation for us in PANS, which again is a rare neurological disorder in children that's very, very difficult to treat. There's no treatments whatsoever. Children can be profoundly and severely affected. And I may just give you one quick, simple to understand mechanism here and what happens to these children, because frankly, it's incredibly scary for them and their parents, is that they will quite literally go to bed completely normal, and they will wake up with uncontrolled tic movements with severe obsessive compulsive disorder, severe depression, severe anxiety. And it's a spectrum of disorder. It can be mild, it can be moderate, and it can be severe. And there's nothing they can do for these children. So it's an autoimmune response to something. In some cases, it's streptococcus infection, so strep throat. And so there is an urgent need, a clear urgent need to find a treatment that, again, dampens and lowers these clinical manifestations through uncontrolled inflammatory processes. So it's actually scientifically, I think it's very sound, and we just want to get this into kids straight away. And I'm pleased to tell you and the audience that our trial in PANDAS, in 15 kids, has been going extremely well so far. So as I say, we are very hopeful of completing recruitment and delivering results in 2023.
Oh, fantastic! I didn't realize that that's what PANDAS was. That you can just go to bed, like a child can go to bed with a strep throat and then have this terrible response. But what you're saying is we've done trials with 15 patients, and all 15 have had a good response.
Well, we don't know that, but we know that we've basically been able to recruit those 15 children quite quickly. We haven't completed our recruitment. We'll make that announcement to ASX when we do, but we certainly look forward to reporting the results to the market, and again, just putting the scientific thesis in with the clinical outcome, it's a disorder that we're somewhat, one shouldn't get too confident, but we're somewhat hopeful that because of that inflammatory cascade that exists there, that we should be able to hopefully do something for these children. But fingers crossed, let's wait and see.
Well, it's a fascinating area. We are running out of time, Tom, but I'm sure you and I are going to talk again, because it sounds to me like there's going to be a lot of news in 2023 for Neurotech shareholders and those that are interested in the company. So let's wrap it up with a bow, Tom. I did warn you I was going to ask you 3 reasons why people should be sitting up and taking notice of Neurotech right now.
I think there's some, and I'll stick to 3 because you've said 3. First one, fully funded to complete all 4 of these clinical trials and report them in the next 3 to 12 months. So that's the first one. The second one is that NTI-164, the one drug product we're developing, we have an exclusive worldwide license to develop that for all neurological disorders. Our focus for now is on children with a dire market need. And I'll say the third one for us is really, if you look at the annual market opportunity in those 4 disorders alone, we are talking many billions of dollars annually in opportunity. And our market capitalization is $50 million today. So when successful, I'm a glass half full kind of guy.
Good to hear.
We believe that can deliver in its own right substantial value upside from where we are today.
Tom, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on Small Caps today. As Tom just said, they're fully funded to get through these clinical trials. This is a very, very big market that they're addressing, but more importantly, it's a market that needs to be addressed. It's our futures. It's the children. It's the next generation. So I commend you for the work that you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you again. But for now, Tom Duthy, thank you so much for joining me on Small Caps.
Thank you, Kerry.